From the studios of KENW on the campus of Eastern New Mexico University, it's You Should Know, featuring the people and events of Eastern New Mexico and West Texas.
Welcome to You Should Know. I'm your host, Evelyn Ledbetter, and my guests today are Dr. Drew Davis, who's a herpetologist, biology professor at Eastern, and Sebastian Summo Elias, right? Did I say that right?
Summo, yeah.
Summo, okay. And you're actually a graduate student here at the university, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Dr. Davis, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm in my fourth semester here, so second year at Eastern as an assistant professor. And I do a lot of teaching, right? I mean, it's mainly a teaching program here, so we have a lot of teaching load. And the classes I teach here are wildlife management, wildlife biology classes, and terrestrial organismal classes. So this semester we're teaching a herpetology class, which is the study of amphibians and reptiles.
Okay.
I do research with reptiles and amphibians primarily, and here in New Mexico and Texas as well.
And you're a Texas boy.
I am. I grew up just outside of Austin, Texas, and went to UT Austin for my undergrad and grad school in Texas State University and a PhD in South Dakota.
A little bit of difference there.
Winter for the first time. Yeah.
I bet. You actually had hardcore seasons there.
Yes, yeah.
And how about you, Sebastian? Tell me a little about your family and where you came from.
Yeah, well, I guess my parents were born in the Dominican Republic, and so was I. But I was raised since I was about one, in Miami, Florida. So that's where I'm from. Great city, but very different from New Mexico. So it's been
just a little bit.
Yeah, it's been quite the change, quite the adjustment, But I really like it here. And
when did you move here?
So I moved here in January. So I've only been here a couple months, 7 months, I believe. So,
okay,
yeah.
But who's counting?
Who's counting? It just flies by.
So the start of your grad program was here at Eastern.
That's correct, yeah.
And how did you stumble across Eastern New Mexico University?
Well, so I kind of always wanted to study herpetology. That's what I wanted to do in undergrad. So I went to the University of Florida, and my minor was in wildlife ecology and conservation. And so I always knew that I wanted to work with herps, but primarily snakes. And I saw that Dr. Davis had a posting the Texas A&M job board about working in his lab on herpetology. And he said, you could kind of cater your project to what you want to do and stuff. And luckily, we were able to do a snake project. And that's why I'm here.
Okay. So you knew coming in that the snake area was definitely, you are a herpetologist, right?
Yeah.
That's your passion is that the amphibians and reptiles, that sort of thing.
For sure.
As a little kid, were you out there chasing after? Were you out there chasing after things that crawled and scuttled around?
South Florida, we have a ton of invasives, ton of lizards. I mean, all the cliches about things crawling around and all that. It's very true.
Yeah, the Everglades, and that's a very unique. Obviously, you've got water on basically surrounds the whole state.
Mm-hmm, that's right. So as a little kid, I was just running around catching little lizards on trees and showing my parents, and my parents were like, "Oh. What's wrong with this kid?"
Yeah, he's a definite boy.
But I guess it developed into a career, so.
And siblings?
I have an older brother. Not quite into reptiles and wildlife and stuff, but, he's appreciative of it.
From a distance or up close?
From a distance.
Well, when we were prepping for the interview, you guys had a rat snake, and I handled him, but our friend here, you said he's maybe not one that will get out of his little spot. He puts a smell out that isn't pleasant, so.
Yeah, a lot of snakes will, but this one's a little bit more on the flightier and side, and so they often musk and defecate as a defensive mechanism, and it's a smelly.
I think
it's a good turnoff.
That looks like a good home for him right there. I was kind of proud that I handled the rat snake, though.
That was great.
Drew, how did this come about? How did you come up with this study?
Yeah, so this is the western ribbon snake is the sort of the focus of this project. It's a state threatened species, and so of course the state, New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, is invested in sort of maintaining populations and hopefully recovering species, getting them off this list. This is a peripheral species, so it never had a big range in New Mexico, and so it's just was never widespread. It's always been sort of along the sort of eastern corridor, eastern third of the state, but even there, it's not very abundant.
Peripheral, meaning it's just right on the border of another area?
The edge, right? Yeah, so this is mostly a species that's further to the west, so it's pretty common in central Texas and Louisiana and towards the Mississippi. But again, here they're restricted to waterways, and it's a pretty dry, water-limited landscape in eastern New Mexico.
So that has to be a really unique research project to find how they came here or why.
Yeah, the state, we don't know a lot about this species, and to manage it and recover populations, we have to start learning about it, and so the state was interested in having individuals work with this species and try to learn more about its distribution, and is it still at the localities or the places we thought they were? Are they at new one? Is it staying stable? Is it increase? So it's a lot of survey work in the field. So just going out and looking for these things, and hopefully trying to find new populations or new areas where we didn't know they occurred. And so the state had a call, right? So the states will put out a call for projects. This was one that was put out through their Share with Wildlife program. So it's one of the many programs that the state has for funding, and this is funded through the conservation license plates that you may see driving around. So I think the quail is an image of one, and their new one is a roadrunner. So those plates, when you buy those plates, you support wildlife research and conservation, and so this was part of that. This species was one of the things they were interested in learning about, and I applied for funding in spring of last year, 2023, and so then we were awarded this project and started it this summer.
And the process, is that a grant that you applied for?
It is a grant, yes.
Did you write that all on your did you have solo or Sebastian wasn't here yet?
Yeah, he wasn't here yet, so it was,
couldn't put that on him.
That's right. Yeah. So we applied, and actually it didn't get funded through that program directly, but they were still interested in funding it, so they were able to move some funds around and find some funding to support this project. So it wasn't formally through the Share with Wildlife program, but that's how it started.
Okay, so funding through the legislature, and the grant process of writing that, is it massive?
There's a lot of steps. They're not these massive documents, because how do you read, these 100-page document? No, but yeah, there are a lot of little steps and little minutia that you have to go through and get approvals at both internally at Eastern and sort of make sure you have approvals and the permissions to do this work, before it starts at the state level.
And what was the grant? What can I ask the value of what?
Yeah, this was about $36,000. It's spread over 2 years, so it's mostly funding support for Sebastian, who's doing a lot of this work, and then supplies and travel.
Okay, so basically, the stipend or the amount that you live on, that's funding through this as a grad assistant, and then, like you said, the travel expenses and research and things like that. So a good fit. Did you have other candidates that came in or applied?
Several applied. Yeah, I put out a call, just sort of saying that, well, at the time I didn't know I had this funding. It was possible, right? I didn't know yet.
So how do you bring someone in if you don't know if you...
Yeah, a little bit. But, I had mentioned to several candidates, and, Sebastian had a good background with working, a lot of research experience with different projects there in Florida. And so, yeah, just interviewed him, Zoom calls, and it wasn't an in-person, but, we met over Zoom and emailed, and
sure.
And yeah, he was excited to come and start this project.
Get started.
Yeah.
Your undergrad, you said herpetology was your undergrad degree?
It's wildlife ecology and conservation.
Okay.
And that was at the University of Florida in Gainesville.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about the research that what was the actual grant or the theme of the grant? What was the purpose? Just proving the area?
Well, so the state had developed something called a predictive model of like species occurrence or species distribution model. And so it's a mathematical model, but it takes into multiple layers of usually abiotic conditions. So it's climate and weather and kind of landscape based on information about what we know these species need or like. And it can kind of predict. It creates a heat map, a map with just sort of shades of colors, where warmer colors should be. These are better environmental conditions that seem to, should be preferred or should support this species of snake. And so they had previously developed this. I didn't do that, but they really wanted someone to come in and try and test it out. Right? Is it true? Is it working? Are these sort of high likelihood of occurrences? Do they support ribbon snakes there at those sites? And we have a few sites that are sort of extra liminal, but not probably as likely, but to test out and see if maybe they do turn up there still, and we can
Sure.
improve that model. But it's really about validating this distribution model that the state had made, and just to hopefully find new populations and confirm that old populations are still there.
Okay.
So that was the bulk of it.
And Sebastian, where are the areas that you're typically, tell me how your plan of how you got started. Like, what is this is going through research through October, correct? You started earlier in the year, and tell me about that.
Yeah, so, the field season runs through May through October, but, obviously we had to, prepare and get ahead of schedule. So when I first got here in January, it was really, kind of figuring out the methodology, what data I want to get from these snakes, how we're going to record it, things like that, and also getting permits, which since we are, surveying through such a large area, all of eastern New Mexico, basically, there's a lot of permits that we wanted to get and a lot of different sites that we wanted to go to, so we had to send a lot of emails, a lot of applications for permits.
And probably a lot of follow-up when you don't get responses and things like that.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
So what is the area, the specific areas? Obviously water, so I'm going to guess a couple of rivers. We don't have many in the state, but where is the research based on the river areas?
Yeah, so mainly these guys are found in New Mexico, in the Pecos and the Canadian River. So that's really where these guys hang out, and more so in the Pecos River. Particular areas where they seem to be, and like there's populations that are persisting, or kind of more so our state parks. So a lot near Roswell.
Okay.
So Bitter Lake, the National Wildlife Refuge.
Right.
There seems to be a population there, bottomless lakes, and some other different areas. Through my surveys, we're still trying to find them in the river, but they do like kind of like more vegetated, sedgy, kind of slower moving areas, it seems. But
so more of the little swampy around the edges where the water isn't flowing as fast, or where it kind of goes down with the rivers, up and down with the rain.
Yeah. They don't like it flowing too quickly.
So when you go to an area, what is your first step when you get there?
Well, so the first thing we're doing is recording weather data. So we want to see, is it sunny? Is it cloudy? And we have, some instruments to record temperature, to record humidity, things like that. Different just abiotic conditions that may be affecting the prevalence of these snakes.
And that when you do that, you say, okay, this is the conditions that we did or did not find a western ribbon snake. So is this an area that brings them in, or is this one that doesn't?
Right, exactly. So
okay.
Yeah, and then so we have a 500-meter transect that we want to see if these guys are in, and we kind of predetermine where those transects will be at a particular area, and we walk along that transect and basically see any ribbon snakes that we find. We record them, and we'll try and capture them to collect morphometric data and things like that.
I'm not familiar with the word transect.
It's basically just think of like an imaginary line running along the river.
Okay, so that 500 meters, this is within.
Right, exactly.
It's what you're going to study.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've learned I actually have learned quite a lot studying on this. So do you go out and you walk that? And
yes.
That's your survey. You walk and try to find them?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And then we just collect and record anything else that we see. If sometimes we'll run into other uncommon species that, we want to collect data on to help other people that might be researching them.
Okay.
And so we'll look at particular vegetation things, specifically around where we caught the snake, but the site in general, to see if maybe they're preferring a particular area in that habitat.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we'll record vegetation, we'll record water quality, things like that. And then, later when we crunch the numbers, we'll see if maybe that's impacting or has an actual role in the prevalence, the density of these snakes.
And the Pecos, obviously, bottomless lakes, and in through there, that's the Roswell area. And so then on the Canadian, where have you surveyed at there?
Yeah, well.
Or is that in progress?
It's in progress, but it's all in progress. But yeah, there's some areas along the Canadian River. It's a little bit more difficult with the access. And so we've been to Ute Lake State Park and a few other state parks. Yeah, Mills Campground is kind of a population that's kind of been previously, thought of as a population.
Okay.
And so, we have been looking there for ribbon snakes. So that's definitely a spot that,
Which a lot of this land is privately owned along those rivers. So that's where you're talking about. You don't just go out there and traipse across somebody's land, the permissions and the access, and there's probably some issues. Some people may not want you out there at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There is, a lot of people. I guess there's this notion that we're going into private land to find these snakes, and if we find them, we're gonna take away their land.
Right.
But, I mean, especially with these guys, it's not the case because they're just state threatened. They're not like a federally listed species, so they're not afforded as many protections as some other more dangerous
I hadn't even thought about that, but the protections through state versus federal. So the federal list is much stronger, more restrictions and things on those types of wildlife.
Generally, yes. I mean, it's. If you're receiving at a federal level, if you're getting federal support or federal funds, I mean, they have to do these things called, Section 7 consults, and because if they're putting money towards some project, a road construction project or bridges or infrastructure, they don't want to be funding something that's hurting a species, which it's hurting another agency's directive or goal, which is to recover a species.
Okay.
And so like I said, this species has a large distribution. It just has probably always had a historically small and kind of limited range in New Mexico, just because we are on the very edge of that species occurrence.
Right. You wouldn't really think of this being the area you would come to for an aquatic type reptile.
No, not so much. But yeah.
How many sites have you surveyed so far? Do you have an estimate?
Right now, it's currently around 40-ish, but we're hoping to increase that number always. Always trying to get more permissions to go to different areas and see if they're there.
Do you camp, or is it day trips?
Yeah, we'll camp. So, a few times we'll just do a quick day trip to somewhere that's near Portales, but a lot of areas are pretty far, so we camp out there. We'll deploy minnow traps as well during these surveys. So sometimes fish get trapped in those minnow traps, and the snakes will be attracted to that, like the movement in there, and so they'll go in the traps. So we'll deploy those traps, camp out kind of near that area, maybe for a few days, maybe for 1 or 2 days, and then we'll just get those traps, see if there's any snakes in them the next day.
Okay. And when you do find and this is a western ribbon snake, when you find the snakes in there, what all do you do at that point?
So we're recording kind of standard measurements. So we're recording weight, we're recording length of the snake, and then so something else that we're going to do is swabbing them for disease. So we want to see if they have disease. We're also swabbing them for microbiome samples. So this can kind of help us see where they're at through certain method, but
okay,
we won't dive too deep into that. But and then so we'll also take a sample from them, a tissue sample. So that'll be in the form of blood. Usually we'll draw blood from the snake. And then for western ribbon snakes particularly, we are also pit tagging them and releasing them back. So perhaps when we survey, because we survey them the next summer, maybe we'll get the same individuals and we can check with that pit tag if we're getting the same individuals. It kind of can give us a little population estimate.
I'm not familiar. Tell me about the pit tags.
Yeah, so they're kind of like they're like the size of a little Tic Tac. It's like a little Tic Tac, and you just kind of insert it under the skin of the snake, like towards the back of the snake. Okay. And then you have this pit tag reader, and you just take it over, and it gives you a very long number, which we have a record of all the snakes that we caught and all their pit tag numbers. So
basically, like chipping your pet, your dog or your cat,
same
or
technology,
something like that is what's used.
Exactly.
And so you can trace where they go. And what are your results showing so far?
I mean, I'm still kind of in the field season of it all, so we're still going out and collecting data. And in the next few months, I'll be analyzing results, seeing if there's any patterns or things like that. So. Okay.
So where did you come up with this little guy?
This is one of our outreach animals. It's from Texas, and so so the Pecos River, of course, goes through West Texas and merges with the Rio Grande. So this subspecies, the arid land ribbon snake, it's arid land, right? Yeah, that's it. And we mostly just call them western ribbon snakes. It's the only subspecies we have. But it's really just along the Pecos River and sort of this western reach of this species range. And so there's some sites that they're at in western Texas, and so we wanted one because it's an active research project for the lab and for events and programs and to have an animal sort of be an ambassador. And of course, we'll have some displays with live animals on our new Roosevelt Science Center. So.
Which opens shortly.
Shortly, yes.
So a great facility, and I know that came through some bonding issues and things like that. So just ready to get situated and completely moved in.
Exactly, yeah.
So have you named this guy?
not a name yet, no.
Will he continue to live there at the Science Center?
Yeah, it's the hope. Yeah, so it's a female. So this one's a female. So yeah, she. So she'll be an outreach animal for us. So.
She's your PR.
Yeah.
He's your PR snake there. So tell me about this. How did you, your characteristics, live birth, that's something I'm not real familiar with. So I thought, well, I'll have an expert tell me. What does it mean when it's a live birth?
Yeah, so these ribbon snakes are what you'd call ovoviviparous. And so this term kind of means that they give live birth instead of, we mostly think of snakes as laying an egg and that egg will hatch out into a different snake. Well, with these guys, they give birth straight to little baby snakes. So a bunch of little baby snakes will burst out of this. This is a female here. So maybe if she gets pregnant or whatever, she'll just burst out a bunch of little baby snakes. And yeah, it's a pretty neat
So
thing.
do they have eggs inside them, like a shelled egg inside of them?
Yeah, so it'll develop like inside of them. Well, it's not like shelled, but
Okay,
yeah.
but a soft, like a membrane or something.
Yeah, and it'll develop inside of them, and then when they hatch, they just kind of release all the eggs or all the babies.
Okay. And at that point, I mean, do they just, they're on their own?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had one we were holding overnight, and she gave birth to 12 little ones, and yeah, they're just little. They're fully functional at that point. They're would disperse away and start to eat little tiny minnows and little fish and stuff like that, little earthworms.
And do they have more than one birthing a year, or is it pretty much just one? Like, do they have more sets than babies, like one set, or I don't know the words for it, but
clutch or something.
Clutch?
Yeah, generally just one. They put a lot of energy. So in kind of midsummer, maybe June, often the females we were detecting they look swollen. I mean, they look plump, very plump, and
Right.
They're filled with babies at that point, and almost to the point where sometimes they're a little bit sluggish because of all this extra weight. And so yeah, they put a lot of energy into producing these offspring, so they don't have enough. Can't really do it twice.
right.
It's too short
it
of a
just takes
season.
all in our season and just to.
And to recuperate the energy for next year, to build up to have more babies next year. So.
Well, and I read something else. They eat fellow reptiles, right? Is that right? They don't eat warm-blooded, or do they?
Well, yeah, these guys primarily feed on amphibians, and they'll also eat fish as well. But their diet primarily consists of amphibians, so frogs and maybe larval salamanders if they're in the nearby area. But
Okay.
yeah, mainly frogs. So that's kind of the case in most of their range. There's not really a whole lot of research on what they eat in New Mexico. So
I'm going to guess tadpoles. It might be, especially on the babies and things like that. Something a little smaller.
yeah, probably.
Okay.
Probably tadpoles, probably a lot of fish. So yeah, that's mainly what these guys are eating.
Huh. That's interesting. And so what do you hope? I mean, do you have something in your mind you're hoping to prove? Do you have a thought that you hope to find a big footprint of them, or just to show the data?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's always the goal to try and find a lot of them, There's, a lot of records from like the 60s, from the 1900s of these snakes, but not really any in like the past 20 years or so. And yeah, very few areas, very few different localities. So I guess a goal of mine would be to find these in a lot of new areas. That would be really cool, I think, to see that, this snake is doing well and it's still persisting and, not going extinct in the state. And that would be really cool, I think.
And I'm going to guess, obviously, you're going to have something that you publish out of this research, which is very good for a scientist.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal.
and that is the goal. And then what you find, that's built upon where you've done some initial research. Future researchers can come back and continue this pattern year after year and flow with it for historical reasons, right?
Yeah, correct.
And find that footprint. Okay.
Exactly.
So I'm kind of getting the gist. I was a business major. I didn't chase after snakes, I promise. A rattlesnake on occasion, but wasn't planned. and so conservation efforts, just real quick, that might be put in place. Any ideas or?
Well, it's kind of tough with these guys
Right.
because I mean, most of the
Who knows?
threats, I mean, the biggest threat they face is habitat loss and, water loss and stuff. And,
Okay.
water has been,
Well, the water is probably a real big issue in this state of the
Yeah.
rivers drying up and just that they have to have that to live,
exactly.
their
So,
food
I mean,
source.
it's tough to see, how exactly they can, do anything about the water loss. But I mean,
Right.
there are other issues that they can, like New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, can kind of work on and try and mitigate some of the threats like facing them.
Okay.
For example, if they do have disease, we can try and monitor that disease and prevent the spread of that. And maybe if, let's say we find a particular vegetation type or something that strongly correlates with the presence of these snakes, maybe they can, kind of conserve that plant species or that vegetation type
Okay.
to help those snakes, have habitat to.
Well, that makes sense. Well, it's a pleasure having you guys. I definitely have learned some things and watched videos I probably would have never watched otherwise. So that's the great thing about doing these interviews. I always learn. So Sebastian, best of luck on your research and hope it does great things and on your publishing. And welcome to Eastern New Mexico. And Dr. Davis, it's always a pleasure to have you and look forward to having you back again.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for all of you watching today, thank you. We will see you next time. Cheers.